There was a time when everyone in our small town, from the baker who sold us our daily bread to the postman who knew everyone's secrets, called me the perfect wife. I was the woman who could bake an apple pie that would win a prize at the county fair, whose stitches on a hem were invisibly small, who always smiled, and who never, ever raised her voice to her husband. For so many years, I wore that title like a badge of honor, believing that to be perfect was my highest calling, my greatest blessing. But what I discovered on a bone-chilling December night, a discovery born from whispers carried on the winter wind, changed everything. It taught me that perfection is a cage, and sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones holding the key. My name is Joyce, and as I speak to you today from the quiet solitude of my little cottage, nestled deep in the rolling hills where I've lived alone for many years, I am 86 years old. My hands, now wrinkled and marked by a life lived with an intensity I never asked for, rest in my lap. My eyes have seen things that no woman should ever have to witness, atrocities hidden behind the polished doors of a respectable home. And yet, I am still here. I am alive. And in the great silent accounting of a life, that alone is a victory. Please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a like on this video. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? My story begins decades ago, back in the 50s, in a version of America that feels like a foreign country now. It was a time when women were expected to be the quiet, steady heart of the home, to be obedient, and to ensure the happiness of others before even considering their own. Getting married young wasn't just normal. It was the entire plot of a good girl's life story. I came from a simple family in the heartland. My father was a farmer, a man whose life was dictated by the sun and the seasons, working the fields from dawn until dusk. My mother, in turn, managed the world within our four walls, a world of canning, cleaning, and raising children. I had a brother, Vincent, just a little older than me, who was the undisputed pride of our family. Vincent was the clever one, the one destined for a life beyond our small town, while I, like every other girl I knew, was destined to marry well and raise children of my own. You mustn't think I resented this. It was simply the way the world worked, the map we were all given at birth, and I had been raised to believe it was the only path to true happiness and security. So when I met Henry, I thought I had won life's grand prize. He was a merchant who owned a hardware store in the next town over, a few years older than me, and regarded by everyone as a pillar of the community. Every unmarried girl in the county looked his way with a hopeful sigh. He was the definition of a good catch, hard-working, unfailingly polite, a regular churchgoer. When he asked my father for my hand in marriage, I remember the eruption of joy that filled our small farmhouse. It was as if the sun had decided to shine directly and only on us. Even Vincent, who was usually so critical and reserved, gave his enthusiastic approval. "Joyce has found a good man," my brother said that evening, as we sat around the dinner table for a modest celebration of my engagement. His words were a balm to my nervous heart. "Henry will know how to take proper care of her." At that moment, his words made me beam with pride. He was acknowledging that I was entering a new, protected stage of my life, under the care of a respectable man. It was the highest compliment he could give. Only many, many years later, after my world had been burned to the ground and rebuilt from the ashes, would I understand the chilling, hidden meaning behind that simple phrase. The true nature of the care he was endorsing. The first year of my marriage was everything a young bride could dream of. It was like living inside the pages of a magazine, a life of domestic bliss I had always imagined. Henry was thoughtful and kind, often bringing me small, sweet gifts from his travels to the city for store inventory. A bolt of pretty fabric, a new kitchen gadget, a box of chocolates. Our house was small, a starter home on a quiet street, but it was ours, and I poured all my energy into making it a perfect sanctuary for him. I learned his favorite meals by heart, kept the floors polished to a mirror shine, and starched and ironed his shirts with a devotion that bordered on religious fervor. I was deeply, profoundly proud to be the wife that any man would want, the kind of woman other women pointed to as an example. My best friend Sharon was overjoyed for me. Sharon and I had been inseparable since we were children in pigtails. We had shared every secret, every girlish dream, whispered under the covers late at night. We had planned our weddings together in notebooks filled with clippings from bridal magazines long before any suitors were on the horizon. She was still single, working at the town's telephone exchange, but she visited me often in my new home. I loved showing her my latest recipe, the new curtains I had sewn, the impeccable order of my linen closet. It was a performance, in a way, and she was my most appreciative audience. "You're just so lucky, Joyce," Sharon would say, her voice tinged with what I took to be admiration as we sipped coffee in my sunny little kitchen. "Henry is a rare find, you know. Not all husbands are so attentive to their wives' needs." Sharon had a particular way of saying things, often with a slight, knowing smile that I couldn't quite decipher at the time. I dismissed it as a touch of friendly envy, the kind that naturally occurs when one friend achieves a milestone before the other. I felt a little guilty for my happiness, but also validated by her words. I had succeeded. I had achieved the dream. But then, things began to change. The shift was so slow, so subtle at first, that I barely noticed it. It started with small comments, little critiques that felt more like helpful suggestions than anything else. Henry began to point out my minor failings. The pot roast was a little dry. There was a speck of dust on the mantelpiece I had missed. The dress I was wearing wasn't quite suitable for a visit to his parents. At first I was mortified and believed he was right. I felt I had to try harder, to be more vigilant, to live up to the standard of the perfect man I had married. "A good wife is always learning, always improving," Henry would say, his tone patient and instructive, and I would nod in earnest agreement, my heart filled with a desire to please him. "Mistakes are how we grow, Joyce. It's how a girl becomes a woman." His words sounded so wise, so reasonable. I accepted them as truth. So, when his verbal critiques started to be accompanied by a light slap on the back of my hand, almost a playful gesture, I accepted that too. I saw it as part of a husband's duty, a normal part of our marital education. My mother had never spoken of such things directly, of course. Such topics were not discussed. But I'd overheard the older women in town whispering at church gatherings. "A husband has to guide his wife," they'd murmur, "and sometimes a firm hand is necessary for her own good." I believed them. I believed it was all born of love and a desire to see me become the best version of myself. The first real slap, the one that couldn't be mistaken for a playful gesture, came on a Tuesday evening when I burned the dinner. Henry had come home late from the store, tired and hungry after a long day of inventory. When he saw the smoking skillet on the stove and the blackened remains of what was supposed to be his favorite meal, his hand flew across my cheek with a force that stunned me. It was a sharp, cracking sound that seemed to silence the entire house. The physical sting was shocking, but it was nothing compared to the hot wave of shame and surprise that washed over me. I had failed. I had disappointed him. "I'm so sorry, Henry," I whispered, my hand instinctively flying to my burning cheek. My eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. "I was distracted. It won't happen again, I promise." "I know it won't," he replied, his voice unnervingly calm, a placid tone that frightened me more than any shout ever could. "Because you're a good girl, Joyce, and good girls learn from their mistakes." That night, I cried into my pillow in the darkness of our bedroom, my body trembling with silent sobs while Henry slept soundly beside me. But I cried without a sound because I had already learned another lesson. A good wife does not disturb her husband's rest. The next afternoon, when Sharon came for her usual visit, she noticed the faint, yellowish-purple mark on my cheekbone immediately, despite my attempts to cover it with powder. "Goodness, Joyce! What on earth happened to you?" she asked, but there was a strange quality to her tone, a current of something that felt less like concern and more like eager curiosity. I fell, I lied, unable to meet her gaze, focusing instead on pouring our coffee. I tripped on the rug coming out of the pantry. So clumsy of me. "Ah," Sharon said, and that single syllable was heavy with unspoken meaning. It held far more information than a simple exclamation should. Falls can be awfully painful. A small, tight smile played on her lips. "You'll have to be more careful." In the years that followed, my falls became more frequent. The clumsiness of which Sharon had warned me seemed to worsen. Henry had developed an entire curriculum for my marital education. A system of slaps for a poorly cooked meal, pinches for a sassy remark, shoves for being too slow with his requests, and a constant barrage of verbal humiliations that chipped away at my confidence day by day. And each time, like clockwork, Sharon would be there the next day, ready to listen to my flustered explanations about running into doors or tripping down the stairs. "You really must watch where you're going, Joyce," she would say, her voice dripping with mock sympathy as she gently touched a fresh bruise on my arm. Her touch had a tenderness to it that, looking back, makes my skin crawl. A woman has to learn how to avoid these little accidents. Even my own brother Vincent seemed to notice and approve. When he and his wife came for Sunday dinner, he would scrutinize my appearance. If I had a black eye, I would see him give a subtle, approving nod in Henry's direction. If there were scratches on my arms from being pushed into a thorny rose bush in the garden, he would make comments like, "Looks like Joyce is learning how to be a better wife. Marriage is maturing her." For so long, I truly believed this was normal. I thought all marriages were like this behind closed doors, that all wives received the same guidance that I did. Henry had a way of explaining everything that made it sound so logical, so right, so loving. He told me he loved me more than anything, that everything he did was for my own good, to help me become the woman he knew I could be, the perfect woman he deserved. "Look at how much you've improved, Joyce," he would say softly after each punishment, his voice gentle as he stroked my hair. "When we married, you were just an ignorant little girl from the country. Now, you're a real woman. A wife I can finally be proud of." And I believed him. Oh, dear God, how I believed him. I clung to those words, to the idea that his cruelty was a twisted form of love, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate. But on that December night, that awful, life-altering night that ripped the fabric of my reality to shreds, I discovered a truth so monstrous that even now, all these decades later, the words still catch in my throat. It was a particularly bitter evening, the kind where the cold seems to seep right through the walls of the house. Henry had gone out after dinner, saying he had an urgent business meeting with some suppliers. It was late, but not unheard of. Sharon had come over to keep me company, as she often did when my husband was away. We were sitting in front of the fireplace, sipping herbal tea and talking about town gossip, when I heard voices from the backyard near the woodshed. "Who on earth could that be at this hour?" I whispered to Sharon, my heart giving a little jump. We rarely had visitors so late, but Sharon didn't seem surprised at all. In fact, a strange light flickered in her eyes, and her lips curved into a smile I had never seen on her before, a smile of keen anticipation. "Maybe you should go and see," she suggested, her voice a low, excited murmur that was utterly unlike her usual tone. A sense of unease crept over me. I stood up and walked to the kitchen window, the one that looked out over the back of our property. I pulled back the lace curtain just enough to peer into the darkness, and what I saw stole the breath from my lungs and made my legs feel like they would buckle beneath me. In the faint light spilling from the window, I could see two figures standing near the shed. It was Henry and my brother, Vincent. They weren't alone in spirit, and what they were doing had nothing to do with business or a casual chat. They were speaking in low tones, punctuated by dark laughter. And in their hands, they held objects I recognized with a sickening jolt. The thick leather belts Henry used for my lessons, the coils of rope he kept hidden in the back of our closet, all the terrible instruments of my marital education. But the thing that made the blood in my veins turn to ice was not what I saw, but what I heard. It was my brother's voice, clear as a bell in the cold night air, carrying a question that made no sense and yet explained everything. "So," Vincent asked, his voice laced with a chilling amusement, "when do we start the next lesson? Sharon says she's ready." And Henry laughed, that deep, familiar laugh that I had once found so comforting, and replied, "Soon, brother, very soon. Our Joyce still has so much to learn, and we're just the men to teach her." In that one shattering instant, I understood. My life, what I had mistaken for love, what I had accepted as education, what I had endured as my duty, had been something else entirely. Something grotesque and monstrous, a performance carefully orchestrated by the three people I trusted most in the entire world. I spun around from the window, my mind reeling, and looked at Sharon, desperately searching her face for some explanation, a denial, anything to make me believe I had imagined it all. But the look in her eyes was even worse than the words I had heard in the yard. It was pure, unadulterated excitement. It was the rapturous anticipation of a child on Christmas morning, waiting to open a gift they had long been promised. "Finally," Sharon whispered, rising slowly from her armchair, her movements fluid and predatory. "You know, it's about time you finally understood how things really work around here." Her words hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating like smoke from a fire. "Finally," she had said, "it's about time you finally understood how things really work around here." The phrase echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the room, replaying itself in my mind until it lost all meaning and then regained it with a terrifying new clarity. The cozy warmth from the fireplace vanished, replaced by a cold that had nothing to do with the December night outside. It was a cold that bloomed from within, a deep internal winter. The room, my safe and perfect little sanctuary, seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself, my knuckles turning white. What are you talking about, Sharon?" I stammered, my voice a pathetic, reedy thing. A part of my brain, the part that had been trained for years to be accommodating and pleasant, was desperately trying to find a misunderstanding, a joke in poor taste, any rational explanation other than the monstrous one that was beginning to form. What works? I don't understand." Sharon's smile widened. It was a slow, deliberate expression, and for the first time in my life, I saw it for what it truly was. It was not the smile of a friend. It was the smile of someone who had been watching a very long play and had been waiting impatiently for the final, dramatic act. She took a step closer, her demeanor transformed. The familiar, slightly gossipy friend was gone, replaced by a stranger wearing her face, someone cool, calculating, and utterly merciless. "Oh, Joyce," she said, her voice dripping with a condescending pity that felt sharper than any slap. "Of course you don't understand. That was the whole point. Your not understanding was the most crucial part of it all." She walked over to the window and glanced out into the darkness, where my husband and my brother were still standing. "What you've been living through all these years, my dear, it wasn't just marital education." She practically spat the last two words, her tone mocking the very excuses I had whispered to myself in the dark. It was so much more than that. It was entertainment. Entertainment? The word came out as a strangled croak. It felt alien in my mouth, a nonsensical sound. My mind refused to process it. "Oh yes," Sharon turned back to me, and the light from the fireplace danced in her eyes, revealing a cruel, feverish joy that made my stomach churn. The best kind. "You see, poor, foolish Joyce, you thought you were alone in your suffering, but you never were. Every time Henry taught you one of your little lessons, Vincent and I were right here, always, watching, listening, enjoying the show. The floor seemed to drop away from my feet. The walls of my small, perfect house, the home I had scrubbed and polished and loved, began to close in on me, pressing the air from my lungs. Every memory from the past few years flashed through my mind, now tainted and grotesque. Every bruise I had hidden, every tear I had swallowed, every humiliating moment I had endured, it had all been a performance for an audience I never knew existed. "No," I whispered, shaking my head in violent denial, a futile gesture against an overwhelming truth. "No, that's not possible. Vincent is my brother, and you're my best friend. You couldn't possibly what?" Sharon's laugh was a sharp, brittle sound that scraped against my nerves. "Couldn't possibly enjoy watching you suffer? Oh, Joyce, that's exactly what we've been doing for years. And you want to know a secret? It has been absolutely magnificent." I collapsed into the armchair I had been gripping, my legs no longer capable of holding my weight. A tidal wave of memories crashed over me, each one recontextualized into something horrible. All those times Sharon had shown up the day after a punishment, her questions seemingly so full of concern, all her little comments about my accidents, all the times she seemed to know exactly what had happened without my having to say a word. It all made a sickening kind of sense now. You were always here," I said, my voice hoarse, the realization dawning with the force of a physical blow. When he would educate you." Sharon finished my sentence, her voice smooth as silk. "Yes, I was always here, sometimes in the pantry with the door cracked open, sometimes listening from the porch just outside this very window. And Vincent, too. Your dear, protective older brother had a real knack for finding the best vantage points. He was quite the director in his own way." She sat down in the chair opposite me, her posture relaxed, as if we were discussing the weather. The sweet, friendly mask she had worn for our entire lives had vanished completely, revealing something cold, hard, and terrifying beneath. "Do you know what the most amusing part of it all was?" Sharon continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. "It was that you truly believed it. You honestly, genuinely believed that everything Henry did to you was for your own good. You were so naive, so utterly desperate to be loved and approved of, that you accepted it all without a single real question. You built the cage yourself and handed him the lock. But why?" The question was a faint whisper, the last gasp of the logical world I used to inhabit. "Why would you do something like this? Why would anyone?" "Because we could," she answered with a chilling simplicity that defied all reason. "Because you were so perfectly suited for the game. So willing to believe, so eager to please, so utterly convincing in your role as the victim. You have no idea how thrilling it was, Joyce. Watching you tie yourself in knots, trying to justify every slap, every insult, every moment of pain. It was better than any movie, better than any book." Just then, the back door creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air that felt like the breath of the grave. Henry entered, followed closely by Vincent. They were both smiling, their faces alight with a shared, private amusement. When they saw me sitting there, my face pale and my body trembling, their smiles only widened. "Ah," Henry said, casually taking off his winter coat and hanging it on the hook by the door. "Look at that. She finally figured it out. About time, don't you think, Vincent?" My brother nodded, his expression unreadable at first, then settling into a look of detached, clinical interest. For the first time in my life, I saw Vincent for who he really was. Not the protective older brother I had adored, not the respectable family man I had looked up to, but a complete stranger wearing a familiar face. A monster, hiding in plain sight. "It's been quite a performance, little sister," Vincent said, and the way he said little sister with a tone of mocking condescension was a dagger to my heart. "You played the part of the submissive wife so beautifully that sometimes even we forgot it was all just a game." A spark of defiance ignited within my terror. "It wasn't a game," I snapped, my voice finally finding its strength. "My pain was not a game." "Oh, but of course it was," Henry said, walking towards me. He stopped directly in front of my chair, forcing me to look up at him. "Everything is a game, Joyce. Life is a game. And you were the perfect main character. The perfect victim." He loomed over me, and his presence, which I had once found so reassuring and strong, now felt suffocating, predatory. The man I had married, the man I had loved and striven so desperately to please for all these years, he didn't exist. He had never existed. He was a character, a meticulously crafted illusion designed for my benefit and their amusement. "Do you know what the best part was?" Henry whispered, leaning down so his face was close to mine. I could feel the warmth of his breath, and it smelled of bitter satisfaction. "It was the moment you started blaming yourself. The moment you began to truly believe you deserved everything I did to you. That was the moment I knew we had won." "Won what?" I asked, my voice trembling. "The most entertaining game of all," Vincent interjected from across the room. He had made himself comfortable on the sofa, as if he were settling in to watch the end of a fascinating show. "The game of completely breaking a person's spirit and making them believe it was their own fault." Sharon clapped her hands together softly, a gesture of applause for a performance well done. "And now that you know," she said, her eyes gleaming, "what do you suppose you're going to do, dear Joyce?" I looked at the three faces surrounding me, three people who had woven the entire tapestry of my life: my husband, my brother, my best friend. They had shared my joys, pretended to comfort my sorrows, and been integral parts of my world. And now I knew. I knew that they had never been my family. They had been my tormentors, my captors, the audience to a horror show where I was the unwilling star. "I don't know," I admitted, and those three words contained the entirety of my despair. I was adrift in a sea of lies, with no land in sight. "Good," Henry said, straightening up, "because we do. We know exactly what you're going to do." "What? What will I do?" "You'll keep playing," Sharon said, her voice giddy with excitement. "Because now that you know the truth, the game gets so much more interesting. Now that you know that every tear you cry, every whimper of pain is a source of pleasure for us, every punishment will be so much more potent." Vincent let out a low, dark chuckle. "That's right, little sister. Now that we don't have to pretend it's for your own good, we can be so much more creative." I understood then. My situation hadn't improved with the revelation of the truth. It had become infinitely worse. Before, I could at least cling to the delusion that Henry loved me in his own twisted way, that his punishments were born from a warped desire to improve me. That illusion, however thin, had been a shield against the utter meaninglessness of my suffering. Now, the shield was gone. I knew that everything that had happened and everything that was to come was motivated by nothing more than pure, unadulterated sadism. It was all for their entertainment. What if I run? The thought was a flicker of hope, and I voiced it before I could stop myself. Henry laughed out loud, a booming, dismissive sound that filled the room. "Run? And where would you go, my dear wife? Who would possibly believe you? A hysterical woman accusing her respected husband, her beloved brother, and her dearest friend of being monsters. They'd say you'd lost your mind." He was right, and we all knew it. In our town in those days, a woman's word against a man's, especially a man as well regarded as Henry, was worth less than nothing. A woman accusing three pillars of the community of orchestrating years of torture for sport? I would be locked away in an asylum before the sun set on the next day. Besides, Sharon added, examining her fingernails with a detached air, who's to say you'd be safe anywhere else? Who's to say we wouldn't find you? Their words were poison, seeping into my mind and paralyzing me. I began to truly comprehend the perfection of their trap. Over the years, they had systematically isolated me. I had no money of my own, no friends outside of Sharon, no skills that would allow me to survive in the world alone. My entire existence, every part of my identity, was wrapped up in them, controlled by them. I was the wife of Henry, the sister of Vincent, the friend of Sharon. Without those roles, who was I? I was nobody. I was nothing. You know what I think, Joyce? Vincent said, his voice soft and intimate as he moved from the sofa to sit on the arm of my chair. I think, deep down, you're relieved to finally know the truth. No more pretending to be stupid. Now you can just be yourself. Myself? I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Yes, he said, and his hand came to rest on my arm, a gesture that once would have been brotherly and comforting, but now felt like the touch of a snake. The part of you that secretly knew something was wrong all along. The part of you that suspected but was too much of a coward to face the truth. I am not a coward, I whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to my own ears. No, Henry challenged, his voice sharp. Then prove it. Get up, walk out that door, go to the sheriff and tell him your little story. Let's just see what happens. The dare hung in the air, but behind it was an absolute certainty that I would do no such thing, that I couldn't. And in that moment, sitting in that room with the three of them watching me, their eyes like predators observing a cornered animal, I understood a terrible truth about myself. They were right. I was a coward. For years, I had chosen the easier path, the path of believing their lies rather than confronting a reality that was too painful to bear. I had been their willing participant. There, Sharon said, a triumphant gleam in her eyes as she read the resignation on my face. Now she's starting to get it. Now the real fun begins. The silence that followed Sharon's pronouncement was a living thing, a palpable presence in the room that seemed to suck all the warmth and air from my lungs. Now the real fun begins. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. It was the curtain rising on a new and more terrible act of a play I was forced to star in. Henry turned his gaze from my face and walked slowly, deliberately, toward the large oak chest that sat against the far wall, the chest where he kept his business ledgers, old family records, and as I knew with a dreadful certainty, the instruments for his lessons. Before, when he went to that chest, he would affect a posture of weary reluctance, a sigh of paternal disappointment, as if his actions were a heavy burden he was forced to bear for my own good. It was all part of the performance. I saw that now. The mask was gone. Tonight, there was no reluctance in his step. His walk was light, almost buoyant. His shoulders were squared with anticipation. This was not a duty. This was a pleasure. He knelt and lifted the heavy lid. The sound of the creaking hinges was unnaturally loud in the silent room, a groan of protest from the wood itself. Vincent settled back on the sofa, crossing one leg over the other, the picture of a man at ease. Sharon remained in her chair, leaning forward slightly, her entire being focused on me with an intensity that was almost physical, her eyes gleaming with a kind of hungry delight. They were waiting. The audience was in their seats. "You see, Joyce," Henry began, his voice calm and conversational as he rummaged inside the chest. "The primary challenge before was one of subtlety. We always had to operate within a certain framework. Is Joyce learning? Is this discipline helping her to become a better wife?" He pulled out a thick leather belt, one I knew intimately, and let it uncoil onto the floor like a dead snake. He ran his hand along its length, a gesture that was almost a caress. We had to invent reasons, justifications. It was all so theatrical. And tiring, Sharon added with a sigh. All that pretending to be concerned. Asking about your bruises and having to listen to your pathetic little lies about falling down. It required so much patience. But now, Vincent said, his voice cutting through the air, sharp and final. We can be honest. We don't have to concern ourselves with your education anymore. We can focus purely on the experiment itself. Experiment? I echoed, my voice a dry rasp. Of course, Henry said, rising to his feet and turning to face me. He held the belt looped in his hand. The experiment is, and always has been, you. The subject is the human spirit. The question is simple. How much pressure can it withstand before it shatters completely? What happened over the next few hours is a blur of pain and terror in my memory, a chaotic collage of moments that I've spent a lifetime trying to forget. But it was different from all the times before. The violence was not new, but the atmosphere surrounding it was. The pretense of love was gone, replaced by an open and gleeful cruelty. They no longer bothered to tell me it was for my own good. Instead, they narrated my suffering, their voices a running commentary of detached, scientific observation mixed with raw, vicious enjoyment. Notice the trembling in her hands, Vincent would comment from the sofa, his voice as calm as if he were describing a specimen under a microscope. That's a classic fear response, a beautiful, pure expression of it. She's trying not to cry, Sharon would say, her voice high with excitement. She still thinks she can win by showing strength. It's adorable, isn't it? That little spark of defiance. They took turns, a fresh tormentor stepping in when the last grew bored or tired. They made me relive every mistake I had ever made in our marriage, but this time the punishment was disconnected from any supposed crime. It was pain for the sake of pain, humiliation for the sake of humiliation. And through it all, something inside me began to change. For years, my primary emotion during these episodes had been a confusing mix of fear, shame, and a desperate desire to understand what I had done wrong. I had always been focused inward, searching for my own flaws. But now, with the truth laid bare, there was no flaw to find, no mistake to correct. There was only them and their monstrousness. The shame that had been my constant companion began to curdle, transforming into something else, something hard and hot and powerful. It was rage, a pure, cold rage I had never known I was capable of feeling. It was a flame igniting in the deepest, most broken part of my soul. Each blow, each taunt, each burst of their laughter was like fuel being poured onto that flame. They thought they were breaking me, but with every moment of their cruelty, they were forging something new inside of me. They were burning away the frightened, compliant girl I had been and leaving behind something tempered and sharp, like steel. I stopped crying. I stopped pleading. I became silent, my body absorbing their punishment while my mind retreated to a place they couldn't touch. I watched them, I listened, and I let the hatred build. It was a strange, empowering feeling. The pain was immense, but for the first time, it felt separate from me. It was something they were doing to me, not something I deserved. The distinction was world-altering. My silence seemed to frustrate them. They were used to my tears, my apologies. My quiet endurance was robbing them of a key part of their entertainment. "Look at that," Sharon said at one point, a note of irritation in her voice. "She's gone somewhere else. That's no fun." "Don't you worry," Henry panted, his own efforts beginning to tire him. "She's still in there. We just have to knock a little harder on the door." They redoubled their efforts, their actions becoming more frantic, more desperate to provoke a reaction. It was in that frenzy that Henry made his first mistake. It was a small thing, a few words uttered in a moment of arrogant frustration. "She's unbelievably stubborn," he said, breathing heavily as he stepped back. "She holds on longer than any of them. In the end, though, They all break. Every single one of them. Them. The word sliced through the fog of my pain. It was a discordant note in their carefully constructed symphony of torture. Them. All of them. My mind, which had been a fortress of silent rage, suddenly became a hunter, seizing on that one simple word. Through the agony, through the ringing in my ears, I found my voice. It was broken and raw, but it was steady. Others, I whispered. A sudden, tense silence fell over the room. Henry froze, realizing what he had said. Vincent sat up straight on the sofa. Sharon's excited smile faltered. They exchanged a look, a quick, panicked glance of recrimination. "I don't know what you're talking about," Henry said quickly, his voice tight. "Yes, you do," I said, and a strange new strength flowed through me. I was no longer just a victim. I was an interrogator. "You said, they all break. Who are they, Henry?" "She's delirious," Vincent said dismissively, but his eyes darted nervously toward Henry. "The pain is making her hear things." "No," I insisted, pushing myself up slightly. I locked my eyes on Henry's. "I heard you. There were others before me, weren't there?" The silence that followed was my answer. It was a confession, more damning than any words could be. In their faces, I saw the confirmation of a truth I had not even known to look for. My horror was not unique. I was not the first. I was just the latest chapter in a much older, darker story. "How many?" I demanded. "It doesn't matter," Vincent snapped, his voice sharp with anger at Henry's blunder. "How many?" I repeated, my voice louder this time, ringing with an authority that shocked even me. It was Sharon who broke the silence. Perhaps she saw no reason for secrecy anymore, or perhaps she simply couldn't resist the dramatic reveal. She let out a little sigh, a sound of theatrical exasperation. "3," she said, and then immediately looked as if she regretted it. "Sharon!" Henry barked, turning on her. "Oh, what does it matter now?" she retorted, shrugging. "She's going to find out eventually. Yes, Joyce, there were 3 others before you. But you, my dear, have been the best, the most durable. You should be proud." "What happened to them?" I asked, my blood running cold. "That's not important," Henry said, but I could see the lie in his eyes. It was terribly important. "Did they break?" I pressed, the pieces of a hideous puzzle beginning to click into place in my mind. "They gave up," Vincent said. "They stopped being entertaining." "And then what?" My voice was barely a whisper. "Then we let them go," Sharon said, but her tone was too light, too casual. It was the voice of someone telling a well-rehearsed lie. "Let them go where?" "Away from here," Henry said gruffly. "Far away, where they couldn't cause any more trouble." But I knew they were lying. I could feel it in the shifting of their eyes, the tension in their bodies. The other women hadn't been let go. Something else had happened to them, something final. And in that terrifying moment of clarity, I knew with absolute certainty that if I did not find a way out of this house, I would share their fate, whatever that fate was. "You know something, Henry?" I said, my voice eerily calm. "Sharon is right. I have been the best, the most durable." "Finally admitting it," he said with a sneer, seeming to regain some of his confidence. "Yes," I continued, a slow, cold smile spreading across my lips. It was a foreign expression on my own face, but it felt powerful. "And do you know why I've been the best?" "Do enlighten us," Vincent drawled with sarcasm. "Because," I said, meeting each of their gazes in turn, "I'm the one who is going to survive this game." They stared at me. The dynamic in the room had shifted. The absolute confidence they had radiated just moments before was gone, replaced by something else. A flicker of uncertainty. A hint of something that looked almost like concern. "You're raving," Sharon said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "The pain has made you lose your mind." "No," I replied, the rage inside me now a focused, steady beam of energy. "I'm seeing clearly for the very first time." I closed my eyes, not in submission, but in concentration. I began to think. I thought about everything I knew about them, every habit, every weakness, every crack in their monstrous facade. For years, I had been the perfect wife, the perfect sister, the perfect friend. I had been so focused on pleasing them, on anticipating their needs, that I had become the world's foremost expert on Henry, Vincent, and Sharon. Without ever realizing it, I had been gathering intelligence. I knew, for instance, that Henry kept a significant amount of cash hidden in a loose floorboard under his desk in the store, because he didn't trust banks with everything. I knew that Vincent drank far too much, especially when he was agitated, and that his tongue became loose and his actions careless when he did. I knew that Sharon had a pathological fear of thunderstorms, a terror so profound that she would become almost catatonic, hiding in closets and whimpering like a child until the storm passed. But most importantly, I knew there was something they were hiding, a secret place. Over the years, I had noticed times when all three of them would disappear together for hours, always with a vague excuse about business in the city. But I had seen Vincent return from these business meetings with dirt under his fingernails. I had smelled the damp, earthy scent of a cellar on Henry's clothes. And I had seen the look of supreme satisfaction on Sharon's face afterward. They had a place. A private place where they kept their trophies, their memories. A place that might hold the answers to what happened to Norma, Maxine, and Beverly. I opened my eyes and looked at them again. "You know what I'm going to do now?" I asked. "What's that, dear Joyce?" Henry asked, his tone mocking, but his eyes watchful. "I'm going to wait." "Wait for what?" "For the right moment," I replied. "The moment one of you makes a mistake, because you will. You're arrogant. You think you're invincible. Sooner or later, one of you will get careless." "We don't make mistakes," Vincent said, but there was a tremor of doubt in his voice. "Everyone makes mistakes," I said softly, "especially people who think they've already won." "We have won," Sharon insisted, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself more than me. "No," I replied, the cold smile returning to my face. "You've only shown me your hand, and now, for the first time, I know exactly who I'm playing against." Henry's face flushed with anger. "You think you're so clever? You think you have some brilliant plan?" "I don't need a brilliant plan," I answered. "I just need to stay alive long enough for you to do what you always do." "And what's that?" "You underestimate your victim," I said. "And that arrogance is going to be what destroys you." For a long, charged moment, there was only the sound of our breathing and the crackle of the fire. Then Henry started to laugh, but it was a ragged, uncertain sound, nothing like his confident laughter from before. "She's completely insane," he said, shaking his head. "The pain has finally broken her mind." "Maybe," I conceded. "Or maybe, for the first time in years, my mind is completely whole." I saw Vincent begin to pace, a nervous habit I knew well. I saw Sharon begin to pick at her cuticles, a telltale sign of her anxiety. My words, my impossible defiance, had unsettled them. They had expected tears and pleas. They had not expected a declaration of war. "What makes you think you can do anything to us?" Vincent demanded, stopping his pacing to glare at me. "The fact that you're afraid," I replied simply. "We are not afraid," Sharon snapped, her voice high-pitched. "Oh, yes, you are," I said, feeling the power shift in the room. "You're afraid because for the very first time, one of your toys isn't behaving the way you expected. For the first time, one of them isn't breaking. And that terrifies you because it means that maybe, just maybe, you don't have everything under control after all." Henry raised his hand to strike me again, but he stopped mid-swing. In his eyes, for the briefest of moments, I saw something I had never seen there before: doubt. "Go on," I challenged him, my voice low and steady. "Hit me. Hit me as much as you want. It won't change a thing. It won't break me. And every time you lay a hand on me from now on, it's just another mistake you're adding to the list." "What list?" Sharon asked, her eyes wide. "The list of everything you're going to pay for," I answered. "Every single moment of pain, every single humiliation. You will pay for it all." "Says who?" Vincent sneered. "Who's going to help you? Who is ever going to believe you?" "I don't know yet," I admitted honestly. "But I will find a way, because now I have something I never had before." "And what is that?" "The truth," I said, "and the names of the women you murdered." They looked at each other, and in that shared glance, I saw it again, more clearly this time. It wasn't just amusement in their eyes anymore. It was uncertainty. It was worry. And yes, it was fear. For the first time since I had known them, they were afraid of me, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that their fear would be the key to my freedom. But first, I had to survive the night. And judging by the looks on their faces, it was going to be the longest and most difficult night of my life. My defiance hung in the air, a declaration of war they had not anticipated. Their answer was not in words, but in a collective hardening of their expressions. The game had changed, and they were determined to remind me that they were the ones who made the rules. The hours that followed bled into one another, a long, dark night of the soul, where they marshaled all their cruelty to extinguish the spark of rebellion they saw in my eyes. They were determined to shatter me, to grind me down into the docile, broken thing they believed I should be. But they failed to understand what they had done. By revealing the existence of Norma, Maxine, and Beverly, they had given my suffering a purpose beyond my own survival. I was no longer just fighting for myself. I was fighting for them, for the women who had not made it out of this house alive. Their names became a silent mantra in my mind, a shield against the pain. Norma, Maxine, Beverly. With every new wave of agony, I would retreat to that silent internal space and repeat their names, drawing a strange and terrible strength from their memory. My mind, sharpened by years of observing my captors, became my last and only weapon. While my body endured, my mind was free. It worked with a frantic, cold clarity, watching, cataloging, analyzing. I noticed the way Vincent's hands began to shake almost imperceptibly as he refilled his glass with whiskey for the fourth, then the fifth time. I saw the tic that developed at the corner of Sharon's left eye, a frantic little flutter that appeared whenever my silence stretched on for too long. And I watched Henry, the supposed master of this cruel universe, and saw the cracks in his composure. He kept glancing toward the front windows, a flicker of unease in his posture, as if he, for the first time, was contemplating the possibility of discovery. They were afraid. My defiance had planted a seed of fear in them, and their fear was making them sloppy. As the first pale hints of dawn threatened to lighten the eastern sky, their energy began to flag. Their cruelty, which had seemed like an inexhaustible resource, was revealed to be just as finite as my own endurance. They were tired. Their movements were slower, their taunts less imaginative. They were three mortals playing at being gods, and their mortality was showing. "This is getting us nowhere," Vincent slurred, his voice thick with alcohol and frustration. "She's not breaking." "Perhaps we should just finish this," Sharon said, her voice thin and reedy. I saw her glance at Henry, and I knew what "finish this" meant. It was the same letting go that Norma, Maxine, and Beverly had received. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my face a mask of exhausted indifference. "Not yet," Henry said, though there was a weariness in his voice I had never heard before. "She's just being stubborn. She needs time to reflect on her position, a change of scenery." He looked down at me, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "I think some time alone in the cellar will help her come to her senses." They dragged me from the chair. My legs would barely hold me, but they supported my weight as they half carried, half pulled me toward the cellar door. They forced me down the steep wooden steps into the cold, damp darkness below. The air was thick with the smell of earth, mildew, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet that my mind refused to identify. They shoved me onto a hard-backed wooden chair in the center of the small space and began to bind me to it with thick, coarse ropes. "We'll be back in a few hours," Henry said, his voice echoing in the enclosed space. "By then, I expect you'll be much more cooperative. You'll have had time to think about what happens to girls who don't know when to give up." The heavy wooden door slammed shut, plunging me into near-total darkness. The sound of a heavy bolt sliding into place echoed like a death sentence. And then, silence. A profound, suffocating silence that was broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing and the frantic beating of my own heart. This was it. This was the end. They would leave me here to contemplate my doom, and when they returned, they would kill me. For a moment, despair washed over me, a cold and heavy tide. But then, through the darkness, I heard them. The names: Norma, Maxine, Beverly. They were whispers in my soul, a chorus of the lost. I was their only witness. I was their only chance at justice. My despair receded, burned away by the cold fire of my rage and my new, terrible purpose. I would not die down here. I would not end up a forgotten secret buried in the woods. I began to work on the ropes. My hands were bound behind the chair, the knots thick and expertly tied. But years of mending and sewing had given me nimble fingers, and a lifetime of abuse had given me a patience born of pure necessity. I twisted and pulled, my wrists screaming in protest as the rough fibers bit into my skin. I ignored the pain. I focused only on the task, on the tiny bit of give I felt in one of the loops. Hours passed. I had no way of knowing how many. Time ceased to exist, replaced only by the singular, all-consuming effort. My skin broke, and I could feel warm, sticky blood trickling down my hands, but I didn't stop. And then, I felt it, a loosening, a knot giving way. With a surge of adrenaline, I pulled harder, and my right hand slipped free. A sob of triumph and relief escaped my lips. The other hand was easier, and then the ropes around my chest. Finally, I worked on my ankles. After what felt like an eternity, I was standing, free, in the center of the dark cellar, my body aching and my wrists raw, but my spirit blazing. Being free of the ropes was not the same as being free. I was still locked in a subterranean prison. I moved carefully in the oppressive darkness, my hands outstretched, exploring the stone walls. My bare feet recoiled from the cold, damp, concrete floor. As my eyes adjusted, I began to make out shapes in the faint light filtering through a tiny, grimy window high up on one wall. Stacks of old crates, dusty jars of preserves my mother had made years ago. Discarded furniture shrouded in white cloths, like ghosts. As I felt my way along the back wall, my fingers brushed against something that wasn't cold, rough stone. It was wood, and I felt a faint, almost imperceptible draft. My heart began to pound. I pushed. The section of the wall didn't budge. It felt solid, but the draft was real. I ran my hands over the surface, searching for a seam, a latch, anything. My fingers found a small indentation, and when I pressed it, I heard a soft click. A section of the stone and mortar swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing a doorway into a darkness that felt older and colder than the cellar itself. I hesitated for only a second, then stepped through. The room beyond was small, windowless, and meticulously organized. Someone had lit an oil lamp, and its low, flickering flame cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. And the walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them, pinned up in neat, orderly rows. My blood turned to ice. I saw myself. Dozens of pictures of me, taken without my knowledge over the years, captured in moments of pain and degradation. But I wasn't the only one. There were 3 other sections, 3 other women. Under each section, a name was neatly lettered: Norma, Maxine, Beverly. I was staring at a gallery of suffering, a museum of murder. Each woman's life was documented from smiling, hopeful beginnings to a final, horrific end. In the center of the room was a simple wooden table and a chair. On the table lay 3 leather-bound journals. With trembling hands, I opened the first one. The name Norma was inscribed on the inside cover. The journal was filled with Henry's neat, precise handwriting. What I read made me want to vomit. It was a diary of torture, a cold, clinical, scientific catalog of her pain. He detailed his methods, her reactions, the progression of her psychological breakdown, all with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying an insect. The final entry was titled Conclusion of Subject, and it described, in calm, methodical detail, how he had killed her and where he and Vincent had buried her body. I opened the other 2 journals. It was the same for Maxine and for Beverly. Years of systematic torture and abuse, all documented, all catalogued. This was not just sadism. This was a life's work. They were not just cruel men. They were serial killers who had perfected a system for luring, imprisoning, torturing, and disposing of women. And I was supposed to be the 4th volume in their monstrous collection. On the table, next to the journals, was a small wooden box. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, were their trophies. A silver locket with a tiny chip in it, a single pearl earring. A small pressed wildflower, its color faded with time. These small, intimate objects screamed with the stolen lives of the women they had belonged to. They were not just names on a wall anymore. They were real. A wave of grief and horror washed over me, so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. But on its heels came the rage, colder and harder than ever before. I was alive. I had found their secrets. I was holding the proof of their crimes in my hands. I would not let these women be forgotten. I looked around the room, my mind racing. I had to get out, but I could not leave this behind. I found an old canvas satchel in the corner, a bag Vincent probably used for hunting. I swept the 3 journals into it. I tore the final, damning photographs of each woman from the wall and added them to the bag. I took the box of trophies. I had to get this to the sheriff. I had to make the world see. My frantic search revealed another door at the back of the secret room, one I hadn't noticed at first. It was low and narrow, made of heavy dark wood. I pulled on the iron ring handle, and it opened into a narrow earthen tunnel. It was a relic from the old Prohibition days, I realized, a secret way to move goods in and out of the cellar. It was my way out. It was my salvation. Clutching the heavy satchel to my chest, I plunged into the darkness of the tunnel. It was cramped and smelled of damp earth and decay. I crawled on my hands and knees, the canvas bag bumping against my side, the weight of the evidence both a burden and a source of incredible strength. Every foot I crawled was a foot further away from them, a foot closer to freedom. After what seemed like an eternity, I saw a faint circle of gray light ahead. I scrambled toward it, pushing aside a rotten wooden grate, and emerged, gasping, into the pre-dawn air. I was in the thicket of woods about a half-mile behind the house. I was out. I was free. But the fear was a living thing at my back. They would discover I was gone. They would come for me. I ran. I ran through the woods, my bare feet cut and bruised by rocks and thorns, my lungs burning, the satchel clutched in my arms like a lifeline. I didn't know where I was going at first, only that I had to get away. Then, a destination formed in my mind, the town and the church. Reverend Miller. He was a good man, a kind man. He was the only person I could think of who might, just might, believe me. I reached the edge of town as the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gray. I stumbled through the silent streets, a wild, spectral figure in a torn nightgown. I must have been a terrifying sight. I finally reached the stone steps of the church, my strength all but gone. With the last of my energy, I pounded on the heavy oak door of the rectory. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and hope. After a moment, I heard the sound of footsteps, and the door creaked open. Reverend Miller stood there, his kind face etched with sleep, which quickly turned to shock and alarm as he took in my appearance. "Joyce!" he exclaimed, his voice a horrified whisper. "Good Lord, child, what has happened to you?" He pulled me inside and quickly shut the door behind us. I collapsed against it, gasping for breath, clutching the precious satchel. "Reverend!" I choked out, tears of relief and terror finally streaming down my face. "You have to help me. It's Henry, and Vincent, and Sharon. They're monsters. They're murderers." I fumbled with the clasp of the satchel, desperate to show him the proof, to make him believe. "I have proof. In here? The diaries?" But as I began to pull out a journal, I was cut short by a sound from outside that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of a car engine, one I knew as well as my own heartbeat. It was Henry's car. It slowed and then stopped directly in front of the church. My head snapped up, my eyes wide with terror, and I looked at the Reverend. His face was a mask of confusion and concern. Before either of us could move or speak, the heavy rectory door was pushed open. And there they stood, framed in the doorway against the morning light, their faces contorted with a cold, murderous fury. Henry, Vincent, and Sharon. They had found me. The moment stretched into an eternity. The three of them stood silhouetted in the rectory doorway, their expressions a chilling mixture of rage and triumph. Behind me, I could feel Reverend Miller's confusion and alarm. For him, this was an incomprehensible scene. The town's most respected merchant, his brother, and a close family friend appearing at dawn, while the merchant's wife, a woman known for her quiet demeanor, cowered in a state of terror, clutching a canvas bag like a shield. Henry was the first to speak, his voice a smooth, practiced performance of deep concern. "Reverend Miller, thank heavens we found her. You must forgive the intrusion, but Joyce, she's had another one of her episodes. She ran from the house in the middle of the night. We've been worried sick." "Episodes?" the Reverend repeated, taking a protective step closer to me. "Yes," Vincent added, his tone sorrowful and convincing. "My sister has been unwell for some time. She imagines things, terrible, fantastic things. We've been trying to get her help, but she's so resistant." "He's lying," I croaked, my voice trembling but clear. "Reverend, don't listen to them. They're the ones who are sick. They're murderers." Sharon let out a sound that was half a sob, half a sigh. "You see? The delusions are getting worse. Joyce, dear, please, come home. Let us take care of you." It was a masterful performance. They were painting me as a hysterical, mentally ill woman, a narrative so common and so easily believed in those days. I saw the doubt warring with concern on the Reverend's kind face. He was a man of faith, but also a man of his time. He looked from my bruised and wild appearance to the calm, respectable faces of my family. Who was he to believe? "Joyce," the Reverend said gently, his voice full of pity, "perhaps you should listen to your husband. Perhaps you need to rest." "No!" I cried, a new wave of panic seizing me. He was falling for it. I was losing him. "You don't understand," They'll kill me. They've killed others. The proof is in this bag. Henry took a step into the room, his hand outstretched. Now, Joyce. Give me the bag. It's full of nonsense you've collected. Let's not bother the Reverend with your fantasies. He lunged for the satchel. I recoiled, clutching it to my chest, and stumbled backward. In the clumsy, desperate movement, my grip loosened. The heavy canvas bag slipped from my arms and hit the stone floor with a sickening thud. The clasp, already strained, burst open. The contents spilled across the floor. The journals. The small wooden box of trophies, which scattered a pearl earring and a silver locket near the Reverend's feet. And the photographs, dozens of them, fanning out across the cold gray stone. Horrific, undeniable images of my own suffering and of the suffering of 3 other women, their faces frozen in pain and terror. The final, terrible photos of their lifeless bodies lay face up in the morning light. A strangled gasp escaped Reverend Miller's throat. He stared at the images, his face draining of all color. He bent down and picked one up, his hand shaking. It was a picture of a young woman I now knew as Norma, a gag in her mouth and her eyes wide with a terror that transcended the faded black and white of the photograph. "My God," he whispered, his voice trembling with horror and revulsion. "What is this? What is the meaning of this?" He looked from the photograph to Henry, then to Vincent and Sharon. He looked at their faces, no longer calm and concerned, but twisted into masks of pure, snarling fury. The performance was over. "This is real," the Reverend breathed, his voice barely audible. "This woman, this is real suffering, real death." "It's fake," Sharon hissed, her voice sharp with panic. "She's a lunatic. She made them to support her sick stories." But Reverend Miller was no fool. He picked up one of the journals, opened it to a random page, and his eyes scanned the neat, cold script. His expression shifted from horror to a profound, righteous anger. "This is no fantasy," he said, his voice now booming with an authority I had never heard from him before. "This is a catalogue of evil." In that instant, the trap they had so perfectly constructed for me, the narrative of the hysterical wife, shattered. The truth was lying on the floor between us, undeniable and grotesque. Henry moved, faster than I could have imagined. He abandoned any pretense and threw himself at the Reverend, trying to wrestle the journal from his hands. "You will give that to me, old man," he roared. "You don't know what you're messing with." But the Reverend, though older, held firm, his body infused with the strength of his outrage. He shoved Henry back. "I will not let you touch this evidence," he declared. Vincent moved to block the rectory door. "You're not leaving this room," he said, his voice a low, menacing growl. For the first time, my brother sounded exactly like the monster he was. "Are you threatening a man of God?" the Reverend asked, aghast. "We're threatening a man who is about to ruin our lives," Sharon corrected him, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. "And we can't let that happen." I knew what was coming. They were going to kill him. They would kill us both, gather the evidence, and create a new story. A tragic accident, perhaps. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let this good man die for me. "Wait," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. They all turned to look at me. "Let him go. I'll go with you. I won't say another word to anyone. Just let the Reverend live." A cruel smile touched Henry's lips. He was considering it. But before he could answer, a sound from outside changed everything. It was the sound of authoritative, heavy footsteps on the stone porch, followed by a loud, sharp knock on the door that Vincent was blocking. "Sheriff's Department," a clear female voice called out. "Open the door." Panic exploded across the faces of my tormentors. "How?" Vincent whispered, his face ashen. The door was pushed open, forcing Vincent to stumble aside. 2 deputies in uniform entered, followed by a woman with a calm, commanding presence. She took in the scene in an instant, the terrified reverend clutching a journal, the scattered, horrific photos on the floor, my own battered state, and the three predators, frozen in a tableau of thwarted violence. "We received a call from a neighbor about a disturbance," the woman said, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "It appears we got here just in time." She looked at me, her gaze both professional and compassionate. "Ma'am, are you all right?" It was then that my composure finally broke. The strength that had carried me through the night, the rage that had been my shield, dissolved into a wave of overwhelming relief. "They killed them," I sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at the photos on the floor. "Norma, Maxine, and Beverly. They tortured them and they killed them. It's all in the journals." The woman who I would soon know as Detective Miller knelt and carefully picked up one of the photographs. Her expression remained impassive, but I saw a flicker of profound shock in her eyes. She then picked up a journal, her gaze scanning a page. Henry began to bluster, a last, desperate attempt. "Detective, my wife is deeply disturbed. These are false accusations from a sick mind." "Silence," Detective Miller commanded, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. She didn't take her eyes off the journal page. Then she looked up, her gaze hard as iron, and spoke to her deputies. "Arrest all three of them, on suspicion of kidnapping, torture, and multiple homicides." Watching them being placed in handcuffs was like waking from a decades-long nightmare. The world, which had been a dark, suffocating place, suddenly filled with light and air. As they were led away, Sharon twisted her head to look back at me, her face a mask of pure hatred. "This isn't over, Joyce," she hissed. "It will never be over." But I knew she was wrong. It was. Finally, blessedly, it was over. The months that followed were an ordeal of a different kind. The arrest was only the beginning of a long and painful journey toward justice. Detective Miller was a rock, a woman of extraordinary competence and quiet empathy who guided me through the labyrinth of the legal system. Guided by the horrifyingly precise details in the journals, investigators found the makeshift graves in the woods behind my former home. They unearthed the remains of Norma, Maxine, and Beverly, finally giving them the dignity of being found, of being named. The trial was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. I had to stand in a courtroom full of strangers and recount years of unspeakable horrors. I had to face my tormentors, who sat there day after day, trying to destroy me one last time with their lies. Henry's lawyers claimed I was a willing participant in a depraved lifestyle who had turned on him. Vincent's lawyers argued he was a weak man, manipulated and blackmailed by Henry. Sharon's defense was the most chilling. She claimed it was all a fantasy, that she and I had invented the stories together as a game that I had taken too seriously. But they could not argue with the evidence. They could not argue with the journals in their own handwriting. They could not argue with the photographs. And they could not argue with the bodies of the women they had murdered. When the jury foreman read the verdict, "Guilty on all counts," a collective gasp went through the courtroom. When the judge sentenced all three of them to spend the rest of their natural lives in prison, a great, shuddering breath left my body, a breath I felt I had been holding for decades. Henry erupted in a furious tirade, screaming about injustice. Vincent simply collapsed, weeping like a child. Sharon just looked at me and smiled, that same cold, evil smile, a final parting shot of psychological warfare. But it didn't touch me. Not anymore. In the years that followed, my life began anew. I sold the House of Horrors and bought my little cottage in the hills. The trial had made my story public, and letters began to arrive from women all across the country. Women who were trapped in their own silent nightmares. Women who saw a glimmer of hope in my survival. I began to answer them, sharing what little wisdom I had. That small act of connection grew into something more. My home became an informal sanctuary, a place where women could come for a few days to find safety and the courage to start over. They called it Joyce's Network. We weren't professionals, we were just survivors, helping one another heal. Decades passed. I learned from Detective Miller that Vincent had died of a heart attack in the prison yard, years into his sentence. A few years after that, Sharon took her own life in her cell. Henry, fueled by his hatred, lasted the longest. He died of cancer just over 10 years ago, an old, bitter man who, I was told, cursed my name with his final breath. With his death, the last chain to my past fell away. I have learned so much in the years since my escape. I have learned that true strength is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in spite of it. I learned that love should feel like a safe harbor, not a storm. And I have learned that it is never, ever too late to begin your life. I started my real life in my 50s, and these last decades have been richer and more meaningful than I could have ever imagined. I have seen the women I helped go on to build happy lives, to raise children free from violence, to become forces for good in their own communities. Their survival is my greatest victory. Thank you for listening to me today, for allowing me to share with you this intimate chapter of my life. If my story has touched you, please don't hesitate to leave a like on this video and subscribe to this channel to discover other testimonies like mine. And please, share it, because who knows? Maybe someone going through a similar trial right now will find the courage to keep searching, to hope, to believe in the impossible. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me.